This is focused on energy in the new environment, balancing security cost and climate impact. This is on the record. Please turn your phone ringers off. Tweet using WGF15, that's the hashtag. And we're going to start with some remarks from this esteemed panel. We'll have a bit of a debate amongst ourselves, but it'd be great if we could bring questions in from you guys. I'm sure there'll be lots of topics to cover. My name is Heinrich. I'm the Central Europe correspondent for the Financial Times. I'm based in Warsaw, and I've been here for about a year, which has been a most interesting year for lots of reasons. We're going to talk about energy, which is sometimes impossible to separate from security, from politics, and from intergovernmental relations. Oil is at $65. We have the European Union probing Gazprom. Iran is coming back into the international fold, and the US is pumping energy out of the ground again. And the EU is throwing billions of euros, in fact, at an energy union. So why isn't everybody happy about energy? Well, in this part of the world, Russian gas is exacerbating tensions between countries. And the EU's climate change strategy and the global climate change strategy is bringing out vast divisions between countries. Here in Poland, we've got coal mines in the south, an LNG terminal in the north. Yet over the border, they're building wind turbines faster than you can say, I saw. So we're going to talk about all these topics here today. It's a fantastic panel. We start from left to right with Pierre Buhler. He's the French ambassador to Poland. Next to him we have Ralf Fücks, a German politician, author and president of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, which is a climate change think tank in Germany. Next to him we have Ambassador Richard Morningstar. He's the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. And finally, Professor Alan Riley, an energy expert at City University in London and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador, if I could start with you. Paris will host probably the most important climate change talks of this generation, at least, in November. Could you talk a bit about the challenges that you're already coming up against, the prospects for a deal, and the importance of the summit?
Yes.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Thank you.
Speak up?
A little bit.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Is it?
Yes? Okay. Yes. We'll speak up, though, yes.
Mic
please.
is working, yes. Well, indeed, we are facing an immense challenge, which is called global warming, although I would rather call it climate disruption, as especially in Poland, warming has a little too much of a Riviera connotation. And a huge challenge, as IPCC has provided in its fifth report in October last year, that if greenhouse gas emissions keep growing at present rates, which are 2.2% per year, and this was during the elapsed decade, 3 or 4 times more than during the previous decade, temperature on Earth will rise between 3.7 to 4.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And that has devastating effects already to be seen, actually, in some countries, with extreme atmospheric events, cyclones, droughts, floods, big challenge on biodiversity, and certainly it would be a big mistake to see effects just concerning a few Pacific Ocean atolls. What COP21, as you hinted at, wants to achieve. COP21 comes 2 years after COP19, which occurred in Warsaw, so we are sort of, with Poland, co-sponsors of this great goal, is to find the ways to limit global warming to a benchmark of 2 degrees Celsius above the industrial era levels, and in order to steer the planet clear of a hazardous and dangerous path. How? Well, by setting ourselves, meaning the international community, ambitious yet realistic goals. EU has shown the path with the package it adopted, European Council adopted last October, 40% reductions of gas emissions between in 2030 over 1990 levels, 20% of renewables by 2030, with a number of adjustment mechanisms to factor in the different starting points of different European countries. And also there's one point which is dear to us as chair of the conference, is to help poorer countries to adjust, to face the challenges of climate disruption with a green fund. This has already $10 billion pledges, which allows it to work. So it's heartening to see, I should emphasize, it's heartening to see that this approach has already borne fruit, as such countries as Japan, Canada, the United States have just submitted the roadmap. The G7 in Elmau last weekend called for a minus 40 to minus 70% of greenhouse gas emissions between 2010 and 2050. China and India are about to table their own roadmap. Now it seems the movement is taking off. We need a tight agenda in the run-up to the conference in December, a tight agenda of meetings to beat the drums. July, September, during the United Nations General Assembly, and then in October, drafting of an agreement which has to be endorsed in Paris in December. We do not, last point on this issue, we also are eager to mobilize not just states, but also cities, because cities are great emitters and of greenhouse gases, and also probably more climate conscious than countrysides, NGOs, business, and the corporate world. And I think the whole thing is just moving forward, and it's heartening to see that.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll definitely come back to that topic later. I mean, Ralf, if you've just brought out a book, just been translated to English actually, Green Growth, Smart Growth, fantastic read if anyone's interested. A lot of people sort of try to structure this debate, and in this part of the world in particular, as growth versus climate change. You know, if you're going to be more friendly towards the environment, you're going to have to cut back on competitiveness, on advantages. Is that the way you see it? I imagine not.
You're right. And for me, this is really now an interesting and an encouraging moment. You know, listening to the French ambassador to Poland talking about climate change, climate disruption, giving a kind of short lecture on these elementary arguments about greenhouse gas effects, and that we have to turn around not only the energy system, but our economy. Fundamentally, and looking back to the G7 summit last weekend, I don't know if you got it, but in the final declaration, there was the term decarbonization.
Yeah.
Decarbonization. Listen to that. You know, this is a deep green discourse. Decarbonization of our economies, which means nothing less than phasing out fossil fuels, phasing out coal, oil, and on the long run, even gas, replacing them by renewable energies and a high degree of energy efficiency. Now, this is nothing less than a new industrial revolution, a green industrial revolution. And I'm quite intrigued and to a certain extent fascinated about the change which is already going on. We are not just talking fairy tales, or we are not talking about a distant future. We are talking about a transition which already has started, which is already going on. If you're looking to the European Union, last year in 2014, almost 80% of investment in new electricity capacities went into solar and wind, and hydro energy and geothermal, but only to minor dimensions. Even in the US, meanwhile, the majority of capital is flowing into the new energy world, in wind and solar. And even in China, you have a massive increase in investment in renewable energies. Last year, China covered almost 50% of the global wind energy investments. And why is that? Not only because of the pressure of the environmental crisis China is facing, especially air pollution in the big cities, but also contamination with heavy metals and so on. It is because of the rapid decrease of cost in this renewable energy sector. If you're looking to photovoltaics, during the last 5 years alone, we have seen a cost regression by 80%, and in wind energy by 60%. So we are really facing a new kind of technological revolution, which will offer a lot of opportunities, especially for Europe, to modernize its industry. I would even say we are at the brink of a new long wave of green growth, driven by basic innovation, not only in terms of energy production, it's the whole system, smart grids, storage technologies, e-mobility, smart buildings. So a fundamental change of our infrastructure and our industrial system, which will provide a lot of opportunities for innovation, jobs, and income. And I would say we should not waste our talent, and we should not waste our capital to prolong the old system, but we should do everything to become pioneers of this kind of grand transition.
Thank you. Certainly a new revolution. Ambassador Morningstar, in the US, there's another energy revolution going on, of course, the shale revolution, which has changed the relationship between the US and oil-producing companies. It's changed the relationship between the oil price, arguably. Could you talk a bit about the implications in terms of security, in terms of how Europe may benefit from that, and the role that shale gas may well play in this new energy dichotomy?
Sure. Let me just first make a comment on what Mr. Fücks said, and I agree with most of what you said. But I think we have to be careful when we talk about the large percentages of investment going into new energy technologies. In the United States, it is about 50%. But then again, not a whole lot of new plants are being approved at this point. So yeah, they're getting older, and they're going to ultimately have to be replaced by something. But and it's good. Don't get me wrong. But I think sometimes those numbers can be overstated from the standpoint of how critically important they are, because of the fact that there aren't a whole lot of new plants and approvals. The United States obviously has been very fortunate to have large energy endowments. We're now independent in gas. And Alan reminded me before we came on that some 40% of our gas production is from shale, 29% of our oil production, and that we've increased our oil production by some 5 million barrels a day over the last 6 or 7 years. But I also want to emphasize that there's a technology revolution going on in the United States as well, and that renewables are increasing at a much faster rate than people had forecast. A whole lot of work, particularly out in Silicon Valley, on new technologies relating to energy efficiency, smart grids, and so forth, that are going to have a major effect. Information technology companies like Google are getting heavily involved in this area, and even a lot of progress in battery storage too, which ultimately may be slow, but ultimately is going to have a major effect. I do think that our energy boom has had a major positive effect from a national security standpoint and from our national security interests, and particularly how it relates to Europe, but other places as well. It's already had a major effect in that we don't import, the United States doesn't import LNG anymore. And that opens up LNG supplies to Europe and to the rest of the world. This is already, this and plus the threat of U.S. exports of LNG has already had an effect on Gazprom's pricing, which is a positive thing. If we start shipping, I think we will start shipping LNG to Europe, whether it's late this year or next year. I think that's a positive thing in creating alternatives. I know gas isn't the perfect answer from an environmental standpoint, but it's certainly a lot better than various other alternatives. But I also think we need to remember that LNG from the United States and the energy boom in the United States is not a silver bullet. It's not going to on its own make Europe energy independent, eliminate the problem of dependency in certain parts of Europe on Russia, but it certainly helps. We also have to remember that the U.S. government is not going to dictate where these LNG shipments go. The market's going to dictate that, and the shipments ultimately are going to go to where the most profits are going to be. That in part can be Europe, but it's also going to be Asia, parts of Latin America. The Caribbean may be another major source given or a major buyer ultimately given their reliance on Venezuela, which is very difficult. But it is going to help, and it is positive, but not necessarily the silver bullet. I guess my last comment is, I really don't believe that what's happened in the United States on energy and future exports of oil, natural gas, I don't think that's inconsistent ultimately with a clean technology. That the United States is still going to push very hard with respect to developing new technologies, using renewables, sharing those technologies with other countries, working with developing countries in that area. And to the extent that we're involved, with gas, I do think certainly over the midterm that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And the other thing I think to remember on the oil side, that oil is not inconsistent with renewables. Very little electricity is fueled by oil. I mean, I've heard statistics like 1% or something like that. So given that renewables are going to be used primarily in the generation of electricity, that's not going to be affected by whatever increases there are in oil exports, for example, from the United States. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you. Some definite comments we'll come back to. That finally, Professor Riley, you've just brought out a paper, I believe, on the energy union, which is sort of the issue that sort of ties all these strands together a little bit. The way you see it, where are we in terms of setting it up, in terms of what we could get out of it, and in terms of countries sort of signing on to the idea? I mean, how do you gauge the support levels?
I think there's a great problem with the energy union at this early stage. Is that and it's a problem I think particularly affects the Anglo-Saxon world. Is that in the sense that you see a communication from the Commission which runs to a few dozen pages, and it's entitled Energy Union. And, another document from Brussels, stick it on the pile, along with all the other documents. And I don't think really there is an understanding that this is actually really serious, and this is very much an indication, or perhaps a statement of intent by the European Union and its member states to transform the European energy markets. And so it is going to grow from a very small, from that communication into something much, much greater. And you build this economic, legal, and bureaucratic machine which will deliver energy union.
Maybe they should take union out of it and call it energy market.
Well,
then the Brits would like it.
Well, let me go over yes, energy market. We should call it the energy market union. That was one of my arguments about it. And then actually,
then we'd have two EMUs and everyone would be super confused.
The energy market union, something that might have gone better down in the UK. But I think the point about it is that this thing is a process with real political bite and real political intent. So the question is okay, what's in this? You could argue it's a box into which you can throw anything you want. But I think there are certain levels of this. I think the first level is about security. And security, for obvious reasons, to do with the Ukraine crisis, to do with the threats to the European Union. I mean, it's often said that there's only been two cut-offs by the Russians. One is in 2006, and the other was famously in 2009. And this isn't correct. It is true that up until 2006, there have been no cut-offs in Western Europe. But there's a brilliant paper by the Swedish Defence Research Agency, which was published in 2006, which identifies 40 politically motivated energy cut-offs by Russian companies and ordered by the Russian state between 1991 and 2004 across the whole of Central Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. And the second point is even after 2009, things have gone on. So, for example, we had last September President Putin sending a letter to 18 EU governments indicating that because of the Ukraine-Russia issues, the gas may be cut off. Was that a threat? Was that not a threat? Certainly, it was another Russian indication of intent. And to give you perhaps the most latest Russian cut-off, the real reason for Turkish Stream is that in October and November 2014, the Russians cut the Western supplies, the Balkan supplies of gas to Turkey by 50% in October and November 2014. So that, if you want the reason why the Turks signed on the dotted line for Turkish Stream, that is why. So that all of those actions create a reaction, and our reaction in part is the energy union. There's supply security issues for the energy union. So what does that mean? Now that means, first of all, we apply the third energy package. The second is that we build key interconnectors to provide supply security and diversity. So if the Russians cut off the gas, we can bring gas in from elsewhere, and we provide alternative sources of supply. Now there are problems with this. I mean, often, you see a lot of local various member states, they talk the language of liberalisation, but they don't actually do it. And the reason is because the local domestic incumbent has a very nice life, making a lot of money, and energy liberalisation means competition.
Yeah.
And of course, therefore, so that you've actually seen a situation, and you've had EU officials recently talk about this, that in certain member states, I will name no names, but in certain member states, you have EU money on the table to build interconnectors, and interconnectors are not built. Now, sometimes it is indeed our friends in Moscow applying some pressure, but actually often it's the incumbents essentially using their own domestic political pressure to stop things happening. So I think the energy security, the energy union is going to deal with this. And that's essentially using existing EU rules, the EU liberalisation rules, the EU antitrust rules, to push this forward, to end this and open up the markets. So the end result of this, I think over the next decade, is a much more interconnected European market with a series of deep liquid trading hubs. And with the potential of gas, obviously, we can talk about this perhaps in a quick Q&A of the scope for LNG trade. And I think there's actually significant scope for LNG trade. I think the potential for alternative sources of gas, potentially Norway, potentially Algeria. There might be some European shale, who knows. So in an immediate sense, that's within this decade, within a decade or so, we will get a significant degree of security which will stop a lot of these problems happening in the future. I think that's one thing. I think the next stage of that is actually reforming, rebuilding and re-strengthening the environment and climate change arm of the Europeans' energy policy to make it more effective, to make it more efficient. I think most importantly, it's to deal with the emissions trading scheme, to actually give that some bite so it can drive forward the decarbonisation. I mean, one of the tragedies at the moment is the way we've got our climate change regulations operating in Europe. We've created what I called a wind, coal, coal, coal strategy. Because the emissions, the ETS carbon costs are so low, you actually end up promoting coal and de-promoting gas. We actually want to discourage as much coal as possible within the system. So I think you'll see a change there. And I think the other element is in relation to innovation, and actually recognising that the Americans have a real point on this, and that the solution substantially to climate change isn't just about regulation, it's about innovation in energy technologies and pushing those forward as well. So I think that's where we're going.
Well, I mean, the carbon price is changing now at Christmas. Now the Czechs pulled out of the blocking minority and left the polls high and dry, and that's now gone through. So, Ambassador, is this something that you sort of feel ahead of the Paris talks, that politics is getting in the way of climate change when Europe should be at its most united on this issue? It's actually playing petty politics with each other?
Well, politics plays a big role, but also what we need to do is to show the way and to plead. I think your discourse is very convincing. One has to show our public opinions, not just in France and Germany, but throughout Europe, that this change of economic model, what it entails. And to me, it seems there's a deep misunderstanding, if not a prejudice, and I would like to diffuse that prejudice, namely that there's a contradiction between fighting climate disruption on the one hand and growth. And for two main reasons. First, climate disruption will hamper growth in the future. And when the figures which were established by IPCC is that depending on how the temperature rises, impact on growth will range from minus 1.8% to minus 4.6%. And such a country as China, which is, as we know, so much growth driven, after several accidents, is investing heavily in clean energy development. And I think you pointed it out very rightly. Secondly, second reason is that there's a whole wealth of growth, competitiveness to be found in fighting this climate disruption. And a number of countries which happen to range among the major world economies and which are the three biggest European economies embarked upon a new model of growth, which can be encapsulated by the motto energy transition. It's in German, it's Energiewende. But I have in mind here Germany, France, and the UK, three leading economies in the European Union, which have set out extremely ambitious energy goals. In France, for example, we have this Energy Transition Act, which was just enacted by our parliament, which goes further than the EU package, and it ambitions France our economy to decrease the final energy consumption by 50% between 2012 and 2050, and to decrease.
Sorry, 2015 or 50?
2050, 50, not 2015.
I mean, come on, you got to be ambitious.
A little bit short, but minus 50% between 2012 and 2050.
And do you think that's achievable, or is that a target?
That's a target set by law. By law. By law.
And people will be.
Well, governments will do whatever it takes to reduce. And for example, we plan to decrease half the energy consumption of buildings. Energy consumption of buildings accounts for 44% of our total energy consumption. And we want to as well to decrease by half the consumption of buildings by 2015. Sorry, it might be banal, common sense, but it's worth to be recalled here. The cheapest energy is the one you don't use, basically. So striving towards a low carbon economy heavily provides incentives for innovation, R&D, for growth, for jobs. There's the whole complex of so-called green economy, green technology. I understand in Germany you aim for a level of renewable energy of 80% by 2050. Is
at least?
At least. Okay. UK, and actually I saw my British colleague in the here in the room. Yes, Robin is there. With my German and my British colleague, we signed an op-ed in just was written a few months ago, where we're laying out how profitable this this transition is for our own economies.
But this is the wider point now. I mean, this is already on the stage. We have a bit of a Franco-German alliance on this issue. Smaller countries in Europe feel a bit bullied by this idea that they're being told they have to cut emissions. They've been told, you can't have these coal mines. I mean, how do you convince them?
They must understand there's a wealth of growth in that, and I think we should all be aware that we as the European Union can be at the cutting edge of this new economic model.
But the British, French and German economies are in a much different position than, for example, the Polish economy. I mean, how can you apply the same model to...
Yeah, but this is why I think we need really a European energy policy, which is more than just a European energy market or electricity market. Our European energy policy has to provide support to coal-dependent countries like Poland, assisting them in modernizing their energy system and their industries. We have the same problem within Germany. We have some regions still very much coal addicted. In North Rhine-Westphalia, the old industrial heartland of Germany, and in some parts of Eastern Germany. And of course, you need kind of medium and long-term transformational strategies for these regions. And this is the same within the European Union at large. We don't want to have these kind of structural disruptions. Yeah? You have to offer the employees and the municipalities in these regions, like in Silesia, an alternative, not just shutting them down like Margaret Thatcher did it in Great Britain in the 70s.
Who had Margaret Thatcher on the bingo card on the energy panel?
For me, this idea of a common European energy union is kind of a grand design. It could be a unifying and motivating project, making Europe the pioneer of this global transition, making us, as you said, the front runner of this green industrial revolution, giving working as a kind of catalytic factor for industrial modernization in Europe, and creating a kind of ambitious project. Most of you will remember the fascination about the Apollo project in the United States, going to the moon. And now we are facing a much bigger challenge, but we have to transform this challenge into an opportunity, and I would say even to create a kind of enthusiasm about it. Entering a new stage of the industrial society, decoupling growth from natural consumption. This is at the very core. Over the last 200 years, in industrial development and this enormous social progress, especially in Europe, has been linked with environmental degradation. Not only in terms of emissions, but also all kinds of other resource depletion. And now we have to reinvent the linkage between industry and the environment, going to kind of co-evolution between these two systems. And I think this could be one of a European lead project, all European grids, as the physical backbone, combining wind energy from the European coastlines with solar in the Mediterranean area and bioenergy from the vast agricultural countries in Central Eastern Europe, hydro energy from Scandinavia and the Alps, making this system more resilient. And creating, this kind of belonging, as European citizens, not only in economic terms but also in political terms.
Sounds great.
Right. Can I just come back? Because I feel there's a need for a degree of reality check here, because for my sad realities of life is that I read all the energy and climate change regulations, and I follow up their impact in some detail. And the difficulty is that what we've actually created so far doesn't work. I mean, we've actually created a structure which, as I say, promotes coal. I mean, in the emissions trading scheme, partly through simply giving too many free allocations.
Not so much.
Free allocations right at the beginning, but essentially we've created a structure which encourages coal. A lot of the first stages of the green technologies we want to use, they're very expensive to deliver. You have to maintain an enormous amount of backup capacity. The UK has got a situation at the moment, for example, where the government is creating capacity payment systems. I mean, the essential problem is this, is if you start putting a lot of renewable on the system, because it's not freestanding, i.e. it doesn't run all the time, you need backup of coal and nuclear and gas and so on. But the problem with this is when you have a lot of renewables, you start beyond 5%, all this stuff comes on when the wind is blowing, it comes onto the system at zero marginal cost. It pushes everything else off the system. So it makes all of the fossil fuels and the nuclear uneconomic. Yeah. So in the UK, then we start actually looking at creating capacity payments. So we're actually subsidising the oil, the nuclear and the coal in order to keep them around. So we've actually got them when the wind or whatever nuclear wind or solar isn't available. So and of course that's made worse by the failure of the emissions trading scheme. So you've got sort of crazy situation. Germany, with the energy change, we're going to be terribly green, but we're building 8 gigawatts of coal-fired power capacity. No, you're building coal as well. You've got, I've seen the coal-fired power stations. The lignite one where they actually move the motorway to pull the new lignite capacity. So the problem with this is that you actually create a situation where, if that structure remains in place, one of the dangers, one of the worries I have, is that if the shale revolution goes global in the 2020s, Europe could end up the principal dumping ground for coal. Europe will become the global dirty man, using more coal than anyone else under our current regulatory structures. I mean, because if you have a situation, as I say, the Argentinians have got huge amounts of shale gas, there's a lot of China, issues about how to develop it, but if that actually goes global in the 2020s with new technology, then what's happened already with the dumping of US coal in Europe will be replicated elsewhere. So, and because we've got this terrible problem of the way the cost and regulatory structures work in Europe, we will be the principal direction. The coal will be the coal ships will be lining up outside Rotterdam to actually keep some form of cheap energy running for Europe.
I'm going to give Ralf a chance to come back, but I know Richard wants to jump in just very briefly.
Let me say a couple of things. First of all, to Mr. Fücks, as my grandmother would say, from your lips to God's ears. And she might say, from what Alan just said, from your lips, hopefully not to God's ears. But let me say a couple of things. First of all, and and I'll come back to the points that we're just talking about. I never did answer your question on shale in Europe, and I can do it basically in 3 sentences. It's been very disappointing so far. I'll say so far, and it's a combination of reasons. Politics in some countries, and also maybe the most important reason, the geology just isn't that good, and that's sort of been the bottom line. We'll see how it ends up. Everybody was bullish, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. I think that has certainly slackened off. And there is some, I think Alan makes a legitimate point that if shale does develop in other places, like China and different and other, which it may or may not, it could have an effect on coal. On the energy union, and its relationship to all of this, I do think that everybody does have to be realistic. I think the energy union is a good thing, but what it basically does is it takes a lot of things that have been talked about before and puts it under one political umbrella. We talk about a single market. Well, it's going to be very difficult to get a true single market. A lot of countries oppose that. But there can be regional markets, and there can be regional successes. I think the Baltics, for example, have done quite well with their electricity interconnections as part of the so-called BMIP plan. I think Alan is right from what he said at the beginning. The EU can't do all the things that Mr. Fücks would like to see happen. There has to be a focus on a few key, very serious projects. At the end of the day, what's going to create the new technology? Yes, there should be subsidized research. That's worked to a good extent in the United States. But it's going to be the market. And when the market determines that these technologies are going to work, then it'll begin to take off. And in the meantime, I think, what you said earlier again is right, that Europe has to focus on energy security, focus on alternative sources of supply. It's not just gas, it can be nuclear in some instances, it can be certainly renewables. And it's really in the interconnectors and so forth, storage, it's really an all of the above. It has to be an all of the above kind of approach.
Thanks. We're going to take some questions from the audience, but first, Ralf, I know you want to come back to
some myth about coal in Germany. In fact, we had 2 years in 2012 and 2011 and 12, when we had a small increase of the use of coal, especially lignite. And the main bulk of that increase had been exported. Germany is a net exporter of electricity within the European Union in growing amounts. And this was partly due to replace nuclear energy, partly because coal has become so cheap. That's true. But now the government itself in Germany, the Grand Coalition between the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, started a new debate how to begin a process of phasing out coal from our electricity system. This is highly disputed, but it will happen. It's only a matter of time. And there are alternatives to that. You mentioned gas. Now, we are now in a crazy situation that we have been shutting down very efficient modern gas-fired power plants because they were not competitive with old, written-off coal-fired plants. But this is a matter of pricing. So either we have to redesign the European emission trading system, or we have to put another price on coal, be it by a CO2 tax or whatever. Coal has to become more expensive. Second, we have alternatives in kinds of backup systems like wind to gas, wind to liquids, and the rapidly evolving electricity battery storage capacities. And the third one I already mentioned briefly is creating an all-European grid, which will bring more stability and security into the renewable energy system. So, on the medium and long term, I'm absolutely sure that phasing out coal is feasible, and it will happen if we are serious with our CO2 reduction targets. You can't have both. You can't have a livable climate and a coal-based energy system.
Thank you, Ralf. Okay, we've got one question here. Could you introduce yourself and be very brief with the question? And one here as well. We'll take both questions, and then the panel will... Oh, he's going off the microphone. Have you got a microphone there? Can you just shout?
Yeah, sure, I can shout. Kurt Seeger, Democratization Policy Council. I have a quick question about linking to the previous panel on energy efficiency and its strategic implications for Ukraine.
Okay, I won't repeat myself. So if Professor Riley will remember, I asked a similar question last year. Obviously, there's a lot of room for improved efficiency in Ukraine, but I have not heard of this being a focal point in international assistance to Ukraine.
Right.
And if not, why not?
Great question. And we'll take a second one here.
Okay, I can ask that one.
Can we get a microphone? Where are these? Nice and brief, please, and introduce yourself. Thanks.
My name is Walter Jurassic. Mr. Ambassador, I'd like to ask you, what do you mean by energy consumption reduction? And the other is, what is energy has impact on water resources?
Great questions. Do you want to answer that?
Energy consumption reduction?
Yeah, and what impact does it have on water resources?
Well, energy consumption reduction means energetic efficiency. When you use cars, guzzler and parsimonious cars, you have a big difference in the consumption. When you have a flat which is flawless, not isolated, you have a lot of losses in energy consumption. Sorry, I'm not sure. Is there a hidden agenda behind that question?
We'll move on. On water.
On water, I think it's a different production of energy through water or water.
I think you're talking about reducing water usage, right, as part of this whole debate.
Well, I think our whole approach is to be more parsimonious in all natural resources. This is a new model, actually, which is already in effect in many countries, and in France, where there's something we call sustainable development applied to cities.
Right.
It means that you have to be more parsimonious in using personal transportation, in the management of waste, in management of water, in management of energy consumption. This is what it takes, and sure. I think it's a holistic approach which can be applied by public policies and private action and private behaviors of consumers. And this revolution. This revolution is going on, and I think it's going on more in Europe than anywhere else.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure, no, you have the mic, so crack on.
One alternative source of energy, which Mr. Fücks has not mentioned, but I would like to stress it, and because this is where our energy comes, our electricity comes. It's from nuclear energy. 75% of French electricity production comes from nuclear reactors. It cares for the cheapest electricity in Europe, and energy has to come from somewhere when there's no wind and no sun.
Ukraine. Who wants to take them? Do you guys want to split between you?
I'll say a few words on it, having been involved going back to the 90s with Ukraine on energy issues and assistance issues. Millions of dollars have been spent with respect to Ukraine on matters of energy efficiency. and setting apart the technology, new technologies, and how that might ultimately affect Ukraine. It really, at the end of the day, depends on the will of the government. That the simplest answer with respect to energy efficiency in Ukraine, and this is an oversimplification, raise energy prices to encourage consumers to close their windows in the winter. I mean, it sounds trite, but it's true. Now, that's not so easy. It's not easy politically to raise energy prices, and every time we would talk to the government about it, and the U.S., every time the U.S. would talk to the Ukrainian government about it, every time the IMF talks to the government about, oh, we can't do that, we have an election coming up, we have this, there's always an excuse not to do it. Where the U.S. government anyway has helped over the years is in coming up with targeted subsidies, so those people who can't afford the higher prices get some help, and that's a difficult issue. The new government is saying that prices will go up later this year. There will be targeted subsidies. We'll see how all that works.
But it's not only a matter of pricing; it's also a matter of governance. You have to crank up. You have to crank up the energy monopols in Ukraine, which are one of the main sources of this kind of crony capitalism and kleptocracy.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And you have to encourage, and you have to empower municipalities to have more competences in their local energy system. So it's also a matter of governance reform. And this, of course, is a conflict of interest.
I agree with you on that.
We've got two more questions here. This lady here in the second row.
Oh, well.
And the gentleman in the row behind.
You can say what you're going to say once you get to the next one. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Katarzyna Pisarska, I'm the director of the European Academy of Diplomacy. I have a very short question to Alan Riley. If and when the Siberian Stream becomes operational between Russia and China, what does that mean to the European market and to the Russian gas we're currently receiving from Russia?
Great question. And gentleman behind you, if you... Oh no, there's one here. There's one coming on your right.
Thank you. Sorry, Moise, I'm a member of the European Parliament and of the Trade and Energy Committees. I think it would have been really interesting and useful and polite perhaps to also have a Polish member of the panel. Poland is a heavily dependent country on coal. And one of the issues I keep hearing from Polish colleagues and British colleagues, interesting enough, and some Dutch colleagues, is the possibility to preserve a future for coal using CCS technology. So it would be very interesting to hear your views on that. Mm-hmm. And very briefly also for Ambassador Morningstar, how long do you think the shale revolution in the US is likely to last? I was shocked, I hadn't thought of that, by somebody, I think last week, a skeptic, saying that it would only last 10, 15 years because there's the peak at the beginning and then it's coming down. If you have an idea of the duration, that would be great.
Thank you. Ambassador, do you want to deal with that one very quickly? Ambassador? Do you want to deal with that last point very quickly, or...?
Well, I can. If one could really accurately predict, one could, probably turn that into making a lot of money. I've heard many different calculations that there are so many reserves, so much gas under the ground that it could last a lot longer than that. But time will tell. I'm not enough of an expert to give you.
I've got some stats on it actually.
Stats are good.
Thank God for a professor here.
The University of Texas Austin did economic geology department did an analysis of the Barnett Shale, which is kind of the oldest shale, the first shale which was developed, and it looks at about 16,000 wells, and they were suggesting that it would, even by 2030, its depletion rates would only be 50%.
Right.
Anybody who's in the oil and gas industry knows that's actually quite a fantastic figure for very low depletion rates, even by 2030. And I think the other thing you've got to look at is this, and I think this is a real danger with looking at shale gas and shale oil, is that you tend to look at the current technology. And what you have to understand in the energy in the shale industry, and it is distinct from the rest of the energy industry, is the technology cost curve and the level of innovation is absolutely enormous. And what you have to do is and I'll give you an example. I was chatting with one guy who's got leases in Ohio. In 2008, the cost of producing was about $85 a barrel. With the latest 2015 technology, they're producing about $35 a barrel. Wow. And so they're actually able to extract more and more of the resource space. Because one of the things you have to think about this geologically is ordinary oil gas is in a reservoir. It's in a kind of space of vacuum into which, from the shale basin, the oil and gas seeps into. So the shale base, on the whole, geologically, should be larger than the oil and gas resource.
Yeah.
So the question is, if we can improve our technology, we're going to be able to access more and more resource space.
Thanks
so if you think about it like that, you realize the scale of things. So I don't want to go for the technology.
No, China, Russia. Who wants to talk about that?
I was asked about that question. Okay. Let me just run through that. Okay. I was actually talking to some people in Gazprom about this. Not at the most senior level, but they know what they're talking about. And they said, well, you've heard of Nord Stream. You've heard of South Stream. You've heard of Blue Stream. Let me introduce you to Gold Stream. And the point about the power of Siberia is that when you're building a pipeline, even in large parts of Central Asia, in Eastern Turkey, whatever, you have got bridges, you have got roads, you have got power lines. But if you're building in virgin territory, in Western Siberia, you have to build an entire ecosystem of roads, power lines, everything. So the cost is enormous. And then you have to add in, of course, the Russian corruption factor on top. So hence, he said, it's going to be so expensive per kilometre, we might as well gold plate it as we go. Hence, Gold Stream. So even if they don't gold plate it, I was at a private session, for obvious reason it has to be private, because with various Russian energy analysts a few months ago, and when they were actually trying to crunch some numbers on the cost of the power of Siberia, but we couldn't get below $500 per 1,000 cubic meters. Wow. So you've got to ask some questions about whether it will really be built, even if it's really be built, how much gas are the Chinese really ever going to take from it?
Okay, so finally, the question on Poland.
CCS?
Yes, yeah.
Maybe a short comment on CCS. I'm not in principle opposing that, but as far as I know, all commercial pilot projects had been shut down because it turned out that the technology is extremely expensive. You are reducing energy efficiency of coal-fired plants by around about 20%, increasing cost on the other side, and then you have this still unresolved problem of long-term secure storage. Of CO2. So it's more a kind of vague promise than a real option, at least for the moment.
Can I come back? There's actually a brilliant article in this week's Weekly Standard on enhanced oil recovery and its links to CO2, which I recommend you look at, because it actually suggests a way of doing it, which could actually create a CCS industry which would allow you to effectively capture CO2 emissions. I don't know whether it's entirely correct, but it's a really interesting argument. And I think there may be some ways of doing it, but actually, as you say, we haven't got there yet.
Yeah. So one short one short counter argument to cheap nuclear. Now, maybe you are right with cheap nuclear regarding written off 30, 40 years old nuclear power plants, if you don't factor in the cost for storage and decommissioning these nuclear power plants. And we are just making some very unpleasant experiences with that in Germany. But if you're looking to the cost for newly built nuclear power plants, they are extremely expensive. Look to Finland. The pilot project, it has doubled in cost and time. Look to Great Britain. They made an they invited the nuclear businesses to make proposals for two big nuclear power plants, and the guaranteed minimum was 13 euro cent per kilowatt hour, plus the inflation. And this is all but cheap. This is, if you compare it with the cost for wind, for instance, it's economically just insane.
Thanks. Cheaper than solar energy, and the same level as wind.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, I have to cut you all off because we have to go for lunch. Thank you for such a fascinating debate. Round of applause, please, for the panel. Yeah, Ralf, Richard, Alan, thank you very much.